Welcome to football's golden oldies from the Toll House Inn, Lancaster. A football life. By the time Joe Mercer passed away on August 9th, 1990, his 76th birthday, football had consumed almost every minute of his life. His earliest memory was that of his father, Joe Mercer Sr., returning home from World War I in 1918. His dad walked through the door, took a football out of his kit bag and threw it for his 4-year-old son to kick. For anyone old enough to have seen him play or manage, the name of Joe Mercer conjures up two images. The first is of his huge grin, a welcoming smile that instantly identifies him as a truly nice man. The second is of his bandy legs, which he didn't know he had until he walked into the Everton dressing room for the first time. As Joe changed, Dixie Dean noticed his legs, stopped doing his exercises and shouted to the other players, "Those legs wouldn't last a postman a morning." But they lasted Joe Mercer for a 22-year career, and Dixie became a great friend who took him under his wing. The start of an illustrious career. Joe Mercer, born in Ellesmere Port in August 1914, was only 12 when his father, also called Joe, died from health problems caused by a gas attack in the First World War. The year was 1926 and Mercer Sr. had been a promising footballer for both Tranmere Rovers and Nottingham Forest, and his son was determined to follow in his father's footsteps. He more than achieved his ambition, playing for Everton, Arsenal and England, before managing Manchester City to domestic league and cup glory, as well as European honours. Joe even became England caretaker manager for 7 matches in 1974, stepping into the shoes of World Cup winner Alf Ramsey, before losing out on the permanent job to Don Revie, another example of the amateurs at the Football Association. He played youth football for Ellesmere Port Town, that's the photograph, before joining Everton at the age of 18 in September 1932. Over the next 3 years he built a reputation as a strong tackling left half who could read the game well before becoming a first team regular in 1935-36. Back to the 1920s and Ellesmere Port changed. The economy had been boosted by the construction of a large Shell oil refinery, and an ironworks plus many workers from Wolverhampton had moved to the town. They retained their Wolverhampton accents and were known as the Wooflers, while Joe and his friends lived in the southern half of Ellesmere Port and were known as Portites, creating a friendly rivalry, although it must be said that scuffles did occasionally break out. Among the Wolverhampton set was Stan Cullis, another boy with a huge interest in football, and Joe later explained, as Stan has often said, there was racial discrimination in Ellesmere Port, those above the station, Wolverhampton, and those below, Ellesmere Port. I was in the enemy stronghold, but it helped my football. Joe had always been a mischievous boy, and if anything was going on, he would be at the centre of it, scrumping, and was known as a bit of a devil, but his intentions were never malicious and were carried out with the broad grin that would always warm people's hearts. At school, Joe was certainly not an academic, finding it hard to concentrate, as he thought only about playing football, cricket or swimming in the polluted Manchester Ship Canal. Father's advice to his son. In the 1950s, he spent a few minutes outlining how much he thought of his father. If anybody inspired me, it was him. His personality had a huge influence on me. Joe's father advised him, the only way you will learn to play football is to play it constantly, and the better class of football you play, the quicker you will learn. Joe was a fantastic dribbler who could play any position, usually centre forward, but equally as well in defence. To help with family finances, he had a paper route, and while he waited for the papers to arrive, they would get a pig's bladder from the slaughterhouse, which they blew up and used as a bowl. On other occasions, his mother would ask him to look after his youngest brother, Arthur, who we used as a goalpost to keep an eye on him when they played games with 10 to 20 boys on each side, and they played until it went dark before moving to floodlights outside the fish and chip shop. The schools in Ellesmere Port did not pay much attention to sporting activity, and it was only when a new teacher arrived from North Wales, Bill Roberts, that things began to change as he organised teams in Ellesmere Port. Bill Roberts' brother Herbie played for Arsenal. In 1950, Joe went back to his Cambridge Road primary school to make a presentation, and Headmaster Bill Roberts can be seen far right on the back row, 3 away from a smiling Joe Mercer. After a year of competitive school football, Joe was in the Cheshire County side, playing centre forward. Bill Roberts jokingly saying he played him in that position because of his crooked legs and wanted him to have plenty of room. On leaving school, he joined the Shell Company on 17 and 6 a week, and by this time he had played for Elton Green Village side, Ellesmere Port and the Shell team, but he wanted to emulate his beloved father in league football. Joe was a toffee all his life. If any football club held a special place in Joe Mercer's life, it was Everton. In 1970, while still manager of Manchester City, he explained, "My years with Everton moulded me, and this is why I am still a great Evertonian. They are the greatest club, and I am still a shareholder." I remember telling Alan Ball when he was feeling down, "Always remember, son, you are with the greatest club of the lot. Never forget that." His devotion to Everton began as follows. I was an Evertonian because Sam Jedzoy, who played for England, came from Ellesmere Port and played with my dad in the Ironworks team of 1909. The manager of Shell Oil told Joe he would have to make up his mind, work or football, and then after 2 final trials, Everton signed him on. His mother Ethel insisted on talking to the Everton secretary, Tom McIntosh, and the outcome was young Joe signed for £5 a week, an absolute fortune in those days. His friends asked him what he was going to do with all this money, expecting some extravagant celebration, but Joe said, "I'm giving it all to my mum." Debut at last for Everton. As soon as Dixie Dean knew that Joe was the son of a man who had played for Tranmere in the early 1920s, young Joe became a sort of Batman for Dean, collecting his mail and running errands for him, with Dean giving him advice and treating him like a younger brother. Joe made his debut at the end of the 32-33 season against Leeds, who won 1-0, and Joe said, "Players like Potts, Milburn, Willis, Edwards, Hart and Copping kicked the stocking tops off everybody." Many Everton players had been rested for this game because they were playing Manchester City in the FA Cup final, which they won 3-0, and Joe was playing for Everton reserves against Preston at Deepdale, but went to Goodison the next day to meet the victors. Joe made 8 first-team appearances in in the 34-35 season, covering for the injured Cliff Britton, but in 35-36 he became part of the Everton first team, who played with a third back like Arsenal. Triumph, then 6 lost years. Joe had joined the squad, including Ted Sager in goal, Cliff Britton and Jock Thompson in midfield, with Jimmy Cunliffe and club legend Dixie Dean up front. The talent in the Toffees team was reinforced by the arrival of centre-forward Tommy Lawton from Burnley in 1937, and he helped them win the First Division title in the 38-39 season. Joe made 186 appearances for Everton, scoring 2 goals, but like many players of his generation, he lost out on 6 seasons of football. Although league matches were then suspended due to World War II, Joe managed to play 26 wartime internationals while serving as a sergeant major. The half-back line, the photograph of Cliff Britton, Stan Cullis and Joe Mercer played for England in 1945 when they beat Scotland 8-0 at Main Road, Manchester. This half-back line would often turn out for Aldershot in the war years. A disgraceful man, Theo Kelly. After the war, Theo Kelly disagreed with Joe and even accused Mercer of not trying in an international against Scotland. But in reality, Mercer had sustained a severe cartilage injury. Even after consulting an orthopaedic specialist, Kelly refused to believe him, and Mercer had to pay for the surgery himself after 14 years with the club. Understandably upset, Mercer moved in 1946 for £9,000 to Arsenal, although he commuted and trained at Liverpool or Tranmere. Theo Kelly brought Mercer's boots to the transfer negotiations to prevent Mercer having a reason to go back to say goodbye to the other players at Everton. Kelly was also unable to persuade Tommy Lawton to stay, and he attempted to sell T.G. Jones to Roma to raise £15,000, but exchange controls prevented the transfer. Many players saw Kelly as a remote, autocratic and petty figure. Dixie Dean said that the main reason for leaving Everton in 1937 was Theo Kelly, but then Dixie hit Kelly plumb on the chin. It maybe hastened his exit. After 2 poor seasons, finishing 10th and 14th, and a poor start to the 48-49 season, in which Everton finished 18th, Kelly resigned as manager in September 48 and reverted to being club secretary. Cliff Britton replaced him as manager, though relegation in 50-51 can be wholly traced back to Kelly's period as manager. Kelly was solely responsible for the selling of 2 of the best players Everton ever had. Past is new. Joe Mercer made his Arsenal debut against Bolton Wanderers on November 30th, 1946, and soon after joining Arsenal, he became club captain. As captain, he led Arsenal through their period of success in the late 1940s and early 50s, helping to hold the Gunners from the lower end of the table to win a league championship in 47-48. Arsenal won the league title this season for the 6th time in their history, having been league champions 5 times during the 1930s under Herbert Chapman. Eve of the FA Cup final was the Footballer of the Year award. The first 2 recipients of this award were Stan Matthews, the legendary Blackpool winger, and Johnny Carey, Manchester United's influential captain. In 1950, the journalist's overwhelming choice was Joe Mercer, who was presented with the trophy at the annual banquet at the London Press Club. To Mercer, the award was a triumph. he had been written off by the disgusting Theo Kelly at Everton and would have retired, only for Tom Whittaker of Arsenal to recognise his greatness and rescue him from oblivion. What a loss he would have been to the game. Joe was immensely proud of this award, only missing 2 presentations in 40 years, one of those in the last few months of his life in 1990. He left the press club to rapturous applause and went to his room at the Great Northern Hotel, where he always stayed before an Arsenal game. Next day he was at Wembley for the FA Cup final. FA Cup final versus Liverpool. Joe always shared a room with George Swindon, Arsenal's goalkeeper, and they woke at 10:30 a.m, went through their usual cup tie routine, ate a leisurely breakfast and had a haircut before taking a stroll down Euston Road. They travelled to Highbury Stadium for lunch before setting off for Wembley. The team changed into a new kit, all gold shirts with white collars, white shorts and black and gold hoop stockings, while George Swindon wore a bright crimson jersey. The teams had to change strip because of the colour clash. Liverpool won the toss and elected to play in their second strip, white shirts. Kick-off. The players lined up in front of the royal box, with Joe introducing his side to King George VI, and then the referee, Henry Pearce, whistled the 2 captains for the toss. Arsenal set the tempo for the match, with Joe encouraging his side continually, and after 17 minutes, Reg Lewis scored for Arsenal. Albert Stubbins, the Liverpool centre-forward, said, "As soon as Arsenal scored, Joe, who was a terrific captain, started shouting at his team, especially Wally Barnes and Leslie Compton, plus the other defenders telling them to tighten up and not let their advantage slip." After 63 minutes, Arsenal scored again through Reg Lewis, who Tom Whittaker almost left out of the team, but Joe told him that Lewis always scored when the chips were down. Arsenal completed their victory with Joe in tears as he climbed the famous Wembley steps, where the Queen presented him with his medal. Unfortunately, a runners-up medal, but Stanley Rouse, the FA secretary, spotted the mistake and the Queen gave Joe the correct medal before he moved on to receive the FA Cup from the King. Celebrations. George Swindon said to Joe later, "I told you from the beginning we would win it." Arsenal had been drawn at home in every round. They had never left London. The furthest they had travelled was from Highbury to Wembley, about 11 miles, which must be a record. In the semi-final, Arsenal played Chelsea at White Hart Lane, drew and won the replay at the same ground. They celebrated at the Café Royal with representatives from all the clubs they had defeated on the way. A nice touch that, as well as many famous former players like Charlie Bucket, Ted Drake, Alex James, Cliff Baston, Joe Hume and Wilf Coppy. On Sunday, Joe thought about the losers when he left his room and knocked on another hotel door, which was opened by Albert Stubbins. They shook hands and Albert said, "What a wonderful gesture." The captain of the winning team still had a thought for the losers, but that was typical of Joe Mercer. On his return to the Wirral, Joe was given a presentation by the people of Ellesmere Port, who were as proud of him as he was of them. But was it now time to retire? After all, he did have his grocery business waiting for him. At the start of the next season, Joe would be 36 years old, but in his own mind he was 31. His wife Nora said, "If you stay 31 any longer, I'll have caught up with you and passed you." Nora insists that Joe sees a Harley Street specialist. Most people in their late 30s would have retired, but Joe went to see a Harley Street specialist to please Nora, but also to reassure himself, and was past fit for the 50-51 season. It was a steady season for Arsenal. Joe played 31 league games and Arsenal finished 5th, 13 points behind champions Tottenham Hotspur, and lost 1-0 to Manchester United in the 5th round of the FA Cup. So was it now time to retire? The grocery business was doing well because his name was known everywhere, and customers flocked to the shop in their droves, as well as youngsters calling at the shop for autographs, and genial Joe never turned anybody away. In July 51, Joe went for his annual check-up at Harley Street, regular training at Tranmere, a bit of grocery, and then the 5:30 Friday night train to London. He constantly reminded Tom Whittaker, "Pick me on how I am playing, not on my age." Joe stayed in the team, and 51-52 was another famous season, as they progressed to the FA Cup final, where their opponents would be Newcastle United, the cup holders. Manchester United beat Arsenal 6-1 to clinch the title ahead of Spurs, with Arsenal in 3rd place. Wembley again for Joe. Arsenal were blighted by injury. Ray Daniel had a light cast on his broken arm, hoping that Arthur Ellis would let him play. Jimmy Logie, with a 15-inch bandage round his thigh, wasn't fit, but Tom Whittaker admitted he couldn't leave him out, and Doug Lishman had only recently come out of hospital. Wally Barnes was injured in the 18th minute and had to leave the game before half-time, and Ray Daniel broke his arm again in an accidental collision with Jackie Milburn. After 85 minutes, with 2 Arsenal players down injured, Arthur Ellis let play continue, and George Robledo scored for Newcastle, and no matter how hard Arsenal played, they were beaten 1-0. As the close season arrived, Joe knew deep in his heart that he couldn't play forever, and years later he would grin and say, "I started to think about retiring when I sprinted flat out down the touchline for a ball and saw the linesman flash past me." End of another chapter. After the loss to Newcastle, Arsenal bounced back and Joe won his 3rd league title in 52-53 on goal average. And of course Joe decided to retire, but soon recanted and returned for season 53-54. However, he broke his leg in 2 places after a collision with teammate Joe Wade in a match against Liverpool on April 10th, 1954, and finally called time on his footballing career the year later. Joe Mercer played 275 times for Arsenal in all. 3 photos that show the great man carried off on a stretcher, then on his way home, and another with Nora. Playing career ends following a broken leg. After his playing career ended in 54, Joe spent a year working as a journalist and a grocer. Subsequently, Joe was known as the footballing grocer in football annuals of the 40s and 50s. During his time at Everton and Arsenal, his wife's family encouraged him to become involved in grocery, and while Arsenal's captain, Joe ran the grocery business from 105 to 107 Brighton Street, Wallasey. It's safe to say that Joe was never going to spend the rest of his days filleting beef, as can be seen in the photograph. We're going to Sheffield. On August 18th, 1955, he returned to football as manager of Sheffield United, replacing manager Reg Freeman, who had died during the close season. The Sheffield United chairman, Senior Atkin, said to Joe after his interview, "Mercer, you've got the job and I hope you're going to manage because I know damn all about the game." And turning to the rest of the board, they know a damn sight less. As a manager, he began inauspiciously, and his first season ended in relegation despite Mercer buying Derek Pace, who would go on to become a hero at Sheffield United, from Aston Villa for £12,000 on Boxing Day 1957. The supporters were not happy and criticised Joe, who said, "What made it worse was the fact that our city rivals, Sheffield Wednesday, were promoted to the First Division at the same time." Joe was always fond of telling people about the time Harry Storer came into the dressing room on a Monday morning and asked an inside forward if he would come out onto the pitch to find something. After a while, the player said, "What are we looking for, boss?" Without halting the search, Harry Storer said, "That bloody hole you were hiding in on Saturday." Everybody learns from someone. Joe Mercer had a few mentors like Billy Walker at Aston Villa, Tom Whittaker Arsenal, Bill Shankly Liverpool, Mark Busby Man United and Stan Cullis Wolves. But it was the great Harry Storer who had a huge influence on Joe, who said this: "Harry didn't like directors and he swore something awful." Harry Storer was a tough, blunt, literal manager who built promotion-winning teams on shoestring budgets at Coventry City, Birmingham City and Derby County, valuing players with guts and speed. Harry took his Derby team to play Sheffield United, and Joe got a bit incensed at some of the clog that was being dished out. So Joe phoned Harry and said, "Well, Harry, you gave us a bit of a kicking on Saturday." Harry replied, "OK, name the players, Joe." Joe quickly reeled off 5 names and said, "There, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to give them a rollicking?" Harry quickly replied, "No, I'm going to give the other 6 the rollicking." Storer was once asked by Joe what the ideal board of directors should consist of, and he replied, "The ideal number is 3, 1 dead, 1 dying and 1 on holiday in South America." Sheffield United had 15 directors who drove Joe crazy. A director said he had been watching football for over 40 years and considered himself an expert. Joe said to him, "My mother-in-law has been sitting alongside my father-in-law watching him drive for 15 years, but she still can't bloody drive." The managerial merry-go-round. Over the next 2 seasons, Sheffield finished 7th and 6th, and in December '58, wanting a move to another club, Joe resigned and moved to Aston Villa, where he had sole control and a 5-year contract, but they were bottom of the First Division. In May 1958, Jack Crayson signed from Grange over Sands, resigned as Arsenal manager, and Joe was offered the job on £3,000 a year, but after talking with Nora, he turned the offer down and stayed at United until December, when he joined Aston Villa. Although he led them to the FA Cup semi-finals, Villa were relegated to the Second Division, but he had moulded a talented young side, and his team became known as the Mercer's Miners. Joe led Villa to victory in the inaugural League Cup in '61, but suffered a stroke in 1964 and was then sacked by the Aston Villa board upon his recovery, a very uncompassionate decision. Manchester City were preparing for 65-66 season without a manager, and City hero Peter Doherty was the preferred choice, but then newspaper articles claimed the new man would be Bill Shankly. Chairman Albert Alexander said that there were 3 men in the running, but no one guessed who was the third man. Joe, a man with many scars but still a passion for football. Nora Mercer knew the stroke had left its mark. Joe wasn't quite the same after his stroke, and Dr. Brown at Manchester Hospital said, "They never are. It's like cutting your finger. It heals, but it leaves a scar. The same with a stroke." Joe Mercer was a man with scars. He had a scar the length of his shin from his broken leg, and had what he called scars on the soul from 2 relegation seasons as a manager, and now he had a scar on his brain from the stroke. Joe said one morning in July '65, completely unheralded, there came a phone call from Manchester City Secretary Walter Griffiths asking would I be interested in joining them as manager. Nora said he was very naughty. He was supposed to be resting, and then he asked me to take him to Manchester to meet the city chairman, Albert Alexander. We had a real hoo-ha about it, but our son David said, "If you leave him sitting there, he'll die of misery, and as much as we both love him, if he kills himself managing, at least he's died happy." Joe knew he could no longer afford to be a loner. He needed a second in command. July '65, appointed manager of Manchester City. The Mercer family prepared to move from Birmingham to Manchester, and Joe can be seen helping. I'm afraid Nora would have to organise everything, as Joe would be about as much use as a chocolate fireguard or an ashtray on a motorbike. Joe announced his management team. 50s FA Cup winner Dave Ewing would join Johnny Hart on coaching duties, while the new assistant manager would be former Plymouth boss Malcolm Allison. Allison said, "I could have been the boss of a smaller club or worked for the FA, and Joe didn't bring me to Main Road. I came to him because I wanted a job that gave me scope. It is a two-way thing. Joe will help me, as I am too explosive and can't stomach talking to people who know nothing about football. I need an older head when I feel impatient." 3 significant figures. Allison had also been offered the job of coach at Middlesbrough by Rach Carter, but called in at Main Road and his journey stopped there. One youngster who arrived during Joe's time at City was Ian Boyer, who said, "Harry Godwin was chief scout and brought in some fantastic players. Dave Ewing was fabulous, as was Johnny Hart." Joe knew that having these guys was great for the club and the youngsters. Joe, however, soon discovered that the situation was worse than he had originally believed. He also sold Derek Kevin to West Bromwich Albion, as he didn't fit into Joe's plans. Early days. After 3 disastrous friendly games, Joe contacted Mike Summerby at Swindon, who worked as a deck chair attendant during the summer at Torquay to supplement his income. Mike travelled to Manchester and was going to ask for £75 a week when he met Joe, who said, "We're in the 2nd division, we've won nothing for years and we're skint. So you're on £35 a week at Swindon, we'll give you £40. Mike Summerby accepted like a shot. The atmosphere at Main Road was appalling. The final game of the previous season was watched by 8,000. Pat Creran had a bet that City's gates would never top United's. Creran lost his bet after 2 months, when City attracted 34,000 against Norwich on a Wednesday night, and United's gate in the 1st division for the visit of Fulham was 32,000. When Joe was manager at Sheffield United, He tried to sign Johnny Crossan from Derry City, but his bid of £5,000 failed, and Joe said, I'll meet up with you someday, son. When Joe joined City, he made Crossan captain and said to him, didn't I tell you? At the end of October, City were top of the league, and Joe went out to sign George Heslop, a strong centre-half from Everton, and Stan Horn, a youngster he remembered from his days at Aston Villa. A signing from Bury that turned out to be real quality. Joe had shown interest in Wyn Davies of Bolton and Colin Bale of Bury, and Malcolm was telling other clubs that Bell couldn't play, so City could nip in and steal him for £42,000, which they did on transfer deadline day in March, beating off a late challenge from Blackpool. After Colin Bell signed, Joe took his side training at Lilleshall in March '66. That was a top photograph. Bell played a major part in getting City promotion when his goal against Rotherham, bottom photograph, guaranteed their return to the First Division. In the 60s, Joe Mercer recognised the phrase typical City was not the issue, but inconsistency itself was the major problem, so this became Joe's main aim. In July '66, England won the World Cup, and Joe worked as a BBC television panellist, and the man in the street liked his honest, down-to-earth comments. Joe Mercer never changed throughout his life, a smiling, honest man. The great Dixie gets in touch. When the 67-68 season began, Joe still believed City needed strengthening, as Johnny Crossan had moved to Middlesbrough, and he believed he had the perfect player in his sights, Francis Lee of Bolton Wanderers, who signed on October 9th for £60,000 and scored in his first game for City in a 4-2 win over Fulham, and Bell and Summerby welcomed him before his debut, both photographs. In December '67, Joe received a letter from his old friend Dixie Dean. I was looking at your match on Saturday, and I think you have the best workmanlike team I've seen since the old days. Nothing fancy, just a set of lads making it easy for themselves, as it should be. Be sure to tell Mike Summerby to keep playing that way, and he's a certainty for the white shirt of England. Plans, then success in the First Division. Before their first season in the top division, Joe and Malcolm decided they needed a fullback, and Allison said, there's a player I managed at Plymouth and Bath who is better than all the ones we have scouted. Joe thought about Buck's age, but then remembered his own career when some of his best days came in his 30s, so he paid the £17,000 fee. First game of the season saw City beat champions Liverpool 2-1 in front of 50,000 fans. Optimism swept the club, but at times they struggled, so Joe, believing 75% of football is fitness, called in athlete Derek Ibbotson. On December 9th, high-flying Spurs were the visitors to a main road covered in snow and ice, with match-of-the-day cameras on duty. Jimmy Greaves scored after 6 minutes, the bottom photograph, but then City put on a masterful display in a match that subsequently was called Ballet on Ice and ended the game as 4-1 winners. City beat United 3-1 at Old Trafford, Spurs 3-1 at White Hart Lane, then went to Newcastle, where City supporters chanted "Champions, champions," when referee John Thacker blew for time after a 4-3 victory. Trophy cabinet starts to fill. The 68 First Division title was in the bank before City went on to win the FA Cup in 1969, League Cup in 1970, as well as the European Cup Winners' Cup. Bill Shankly said in May '69, City are a young side and they have so much skill. They can reach a standard of skill which I doubt anyone in England can equal, and they are more than capable of thrashing any side. And while some teams are content to beat you, City want to go and thrash you. They can murder a team with their skill. Wembley beckons. In the week leading up to the final against Leicester City, Joe announced that City would change their strip because of a colour clash. Instead of maroon and white stripes, their traditional change strip, Alisson had persuaded Joe that AC Milan's red and black stripe would provide invincibility that the Italians enjoyed, the far photograph. Malcolm Alisson was banned from the touchline for excessive coaching earlier in the season. A Francis Lee cross after 23 minutes was dispatched past Peter Shilton by Neil Young to win the trophy 1-0 in a largely subdued final, and Tony Buck collected the cup from Princess Anne. That's the first photograph. It was estimated over 250,000 fans welcomed City in Albert Square, far more than Arsenal in Islington in 1950 when Joe was captain. A few days later, the phone rang in the Mercer home, and when Nora answered it, she recognised the voice of Ron Wiley, former Aston Villa player, who laughingly said, "By gum, Nora, it's a good job you didn't let him go back into football." Nora laughed, and so did Joe. Europe was the icing on the cake for a great manager. City's opponents in the 1970 European Cup Winners' Cup final were Gornik of Poland, but Summerby was out injured and Oakes played when he wasn't 100% fit. The game was played in miserable conditions in the Prater Stadium in Vienna, and Ian Boyer, who was on the substitutes bench, said he always thought they would win the game. Confidence was so high, emanating from Mercer and Alisson. Neil Young scored first, but soon after Mike Doyle went off injured to be replaced by Ian Boyer, and then Francis Lee netted a penalty before Gornik reduced the arrears in the 70th minute, but City had conquered Europe. For Joe, the success in Vienna gave him the satisfaction of knowing that he was one of the most successful men in football, winning the FA Cup plus the League Championship as a player and the manager, and being involved in 7 major finals. The demise of Joe Mercer at Main Road and the clown who replaced him. In 70-71, Mercer had a dispute with his assistant Malcolm Alisson after the two men became embroiled in Manchester City's takeover battle. Joe Mercer supported the existing board, led by the respected Albert Alexander, while Alisson supported the rival group, led by Peter Swales, after being promised that he would be manager. The takeover succeeded, and Joe was shocked to discover that his car parking space and office were removed. This led to Joe moving upstairs to become general manager at Manchester City in October '71, with Alisson taking over as team manager. But City struggled under Alisson, and in March '73 he resigned, which should not have surprised anyone. He was always telling people how good he was, and he managed 18 clubs in 30 years, so it's difficult to understand why chairmen and directors would employ a man with no staying power and a big mouth, and even a plan for the future, because under him there was no future. Alisson would then move to Crystal Palace, and Jim Cannon, a defender for Palace, said, "Malcolm Alisson put Palace on the map. No other man could single-handedly take a club from the first division to the third division and still become an instant hero." Malcolm Alisson was always looking for publicity and a camera, I think there is no doubt that Malcolm Allison was a good talker, but a very poor manager. End of the road for a great man, the footballing grocer. There'll only be one manager of Manchester City, and that's Joe Mercer. He was a man respected like Matt Busby and Bill Shankly, loved by the people, a character in his own right, a fatherly figure. There will never be another like him. That's what Mike Summerby said in 1990. Joe could see that Malcolm no longer wanted him at Main Road. His title of general manager was removed, his car space was removed, and his name taken off his office door. Joe was devastated and understandably angry at the club. His pride was hurt, and he told the press that he believed City could have found him a position at Main Road similar to his friend Matt Busby at United. Joe Mercer had been promised a job for life by the directors, but we have seen in nearly every one of our football talks that the directors cannot be trusted to do the right thing, and they lie without shame. In June 1972, Joe left for Coventry City, where he felt wanted. A new partnership with Gordon Mill. Joe Mercer left Manchester City at the end of the 70-71 season and became manager of Coventry City, who he managed from 72 to 74. The two games against Manchester City had great significance for Joe, and at Highfield Road, Coventry matched their opponents, playing thrilling football in a 3-2 victory, and after beating Arsenal 2-0 at Highbury, he was presented with the Manager of the Month award for November, insisting of course that Gordon Mill was by his side to share the award. The return game at City at Main Road saw Joe greeted by over 30,000 fans who gave him a magnificent ovation, which moved Joe deeply as he saw his side win 2-1. The following season, 73-74, was one of mixed fortunes, finishing in 16th place, and when Coventry played City in the league quarter-finals, losing 4-2 in a replay, the Mancunians were now managed by Ron Saunders, its third manager since Joe left 17 months earlier, and incredibly, Saunders guided City to the League Cup final and was then sacked. So much for consistency at Main Road, as well as a chairman, Peter Swales, who was basically an amateur with absolutely no knowledge or understanding of the game of football. England caretaker manager. Joe Mercer was also caretaker manager of the England national football team for a brief period in 1974, after Sir Alf Ramsey's resignation. During his time in charge, England won the 74 British Home Championship title, which was shared with Scotland. In total, Mercer was in charge for 7 games, winning 3 of them, drawing another 3 and losing 1. When he left the England caretaker role, he returned to Coventry, and the board recognised that Joe's presence would give the club prestige, and to ensure he remained in the Midlands, they made him a director. He would meet supporters, attend social evenings, opening ceremonies, and visit schools, plus he was a regular after-dinner speaker, being comfortable in his role as football's elder statesman. Joe was actually at Goodison Park when his friend Dixie Dean collapsed and died. On television in the evening, Joe gave a moving tribute and was very, very close to tears. Even when he left Main Road, he was still let down by the board. In the years following Joe's departure from Main Road, City's supporters often spoke of him returning in some capacity, such as president or director. And at every AGM in the 1980s, a shareholder would raise the issue under any other business. Every time, without fail, Chairman Peter Swales would say that City would speak with Joe and make the offer that the the truth was somewhat different. Swales lied. Is anyone surprised? They would often meet at England international matches or FA Cup finals because Swales had a role at the FA and the 10-minute chat would have been enough. Nora said Joe would have loved to remain involved with City, but once Swales became chairman, the club changed, and it wasn't really until Franny Lee returned in the 93-94 season that I was invited to games, and that invitation has lasted ever since. If only Peter Swales and the rest of the directors had welcomed City's greatest manager back during the 70s and 80s. But is this because they do not want to share the limelight with a mere footballer, seeing themselves as being much higher up the social scale? A wonderful example of a man and a footballer. Joe kept in touch with many friends he had made during his long career, including Bill Dixie D. Joe took Dixie to see a specialist to improve his mobility before his artificial leg could be fitted, and as they entered the waiting room, Joe remembered the scene. The room was filled with chaps who had limbs missing, and Dixie took a look round and cracked, "Aye, I see Tommy Smith's been in here." There was always humour in the game back then, but where has it gone now? First football figure on This Is Your Life. You could see Joe there entering the television studio and him being presented with the This Is Your Life. On March 25th, 1970, Joe Mercer was surprised by the famous red book of Eamon Andrews, as can be seen here. A football great, Joe Mercer, OBE. Renowned Manchester artist Mark Kennedy created this mosaic of Joe looking towards the kickback stand at Main Road, bandy legs in full view. After quitting as Coventry City boss, he served as a director of the club from 1975 to his retirement in 1981. In 1976, he was made an officer of the Order of the British Empire for services to football, and I cannot think of anyone more deserving of this award than the ever-smiling Joe Mercer. He suffered with Alzheimer's disease in later life and died sitting in his favourite armchair on his 76th birthday in 1990. The great man remembered. At Main Road, a corporate suite, the Joe Mercer Suite, was officially opened by his widow Nora in 1993. A similar facility named after him exists at Goodison Park. In 1993, Joe Mercer's official biography, Football with a Smile, was written by Gary James. This book sold out within 6 months and was revised and republished early in 2010, which wasn't surprising, as this man was loved by the majority of football fans. In 2014, a set of postage stamps was produced by the Royal Mail in recognition of the achievements of those featured, including Joe Mercer, and their contribution to British society. Nora, on her 90th birthday, remembers her beloved Joe. Nora looks at her husband on her 90th birthday. She was so proud of his achievements. Joe certainly had the right temperament and proved throughout a great playing and managerial career that he could adapt. He may have told the outside world that football was a simple game, but it took an awful lot of work to make his team's successes appear uncomplicated. All these years later, the lasting memory of Joe Mercer is of a happy, interesting hugely successful man who made the difficult seem easy and never looked down on anyone. He stayed in the game because he loved it, and he lived his life in football with a smile.